she spent within the confines of her usual life felt like an illusion. The events, the conversations, the smiles, all of it was overshadowed by the memory of that quiet moment they had shared in the garden. His words echoed in her mind, urging her to break free, to be more than what society demanded, but how could she? She was a Featherington, and the expectations were clear. She was meant to marry well, to make advantageous connections, to secure her future in a world that valued title and status above all else. Yet, as she moved through her days, every glance from Christian seemed to challenge those very notions. Each interaction with him left her feeling more conflicted, more uncertain. She could sense the growing tension between them, something they both tried to keep hidden. Buried beneath the surface of their polite smiles and formal exchanges, it was during another ball at the Featherington estate that everything changed. The night was filled with the usual festivities, dancing, laughter, and the sparkle of jewels catching the light. But Eleanor couldn't focus on the music or the dancing partners. Her eyes were drawn to one person, and one person only. Christian. He had entered the ballroom with his usual air of quiet composure, but there was something different about him tonight. His gaze seemed to find hers across the room, as if there was a magnetic force between them that could not be denied.
You can see it's all way YR is all since I is always all way all YR is all YI is I is all I and as I is all I is I is I by.
Impossible to ignore, even in the crowded space. His eyes held an intensity that made her heart skip, a look that spoke louder than words could ever express as the evening wore on. Eleanor found herself unable to avoid him any longer. Their paths crossed once again, this time in a secluded corner of the garden, far from the prying eyes of the ballroom. Eleanor's pulse quickened as she stepped outside, and there he was, leaning casually against the stone wall, as though he had been waiting for her. "You've been avoiding me," Christian said, his voice low and filled with an unspoken question. Eleanor felt a flush creep up her neck, but she couldn't bring herself to lie. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've simply been busy." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharp. "Busy with what? Playing the part? Trying to please everyone?" Her heart fluttered, a pang of guilt twisting in her chest. "That's what I'm supposed to do, isn't it? That's what's expected of me." Christian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet comforting at the same time. But what about what you want? What about what you feel?" Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment the world around them seemed to fade into nothingness. There was no ballroom. No chatter, no rules. Just the two of them, standing in the garden, bathed in the soft moonlight. "I don't know what I want," Eleanor admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I only know that when I'm with you, everything feels different." Christian's eyes softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The touch was electric, sending a shockwave through her entire body. She wanted to pull away, to remind herself of the consequences, but the pull of his touch was too strong. "You don't have to hide anymore," he said, his voice a mixture of hope and urgency. "You don't have to pretend. I'm not like the others. I don't care about your title or your family's expectations. I care about you." Eleanor's heart raced as his words sank in. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this, so openly, so honestly. It was a revelation, a moment of pure clarity. She had always been confined by her role, by the expectations that came with being a Featherington. But now in Christian's presence, she felt as though she could finally breathe. She could finally be herself. But just as the moment seemed to reach its peak, a voice called out from behind them, shattering the fragile spell that had been cast over them. "Eleanor." She turned quickly, her heart hammering in her chest. was her cousin, and the alarm in her voice was enough to break the connection between them. Eleanor quickly pulled her hand away from Christian's, as if the touch itself could betray them. "I must go," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to appear calm.
There's been a misunderstanding."
Without waiting for a response, she hurried back toward the house, her heart still racing. She could feel Christian's gaze on her, following her retreating figure, but she dared not look back. The reality of what they had almost shared hit her like a tidal wave. It wasn't just a fleeting attraction, it was something far deeper, something that could not be ignored or hidden for much longer. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her bed, staring up at the ceiling, her thoughts consumed by Christian and the undeniable pull between them. But more than that, she felt a surge of guilt and fear. She knew the consequences of their connection all too well. If anyone found out, it would ruin both of their lives. The scandal would be too great to bear, too destructive for them to come back from. But the deeper Eleanor fell into her feelings for Christian, the harder it became to ignore what was blossoming between them. The forbidden nature of their bond only made it more intoxicating, more dangerous. And as the days passed, Eleanor knew that she was standing on the edge of a precipice. One wrong step, one slip, and their secret would be exposed, tearing everything apart. And yet, she couldn't stop herself. The more she tried to fight it, the more she realized that Christian was no longer just a passing infatuation. He had become the one thing she couldn't live without. The days following that fateful encounter in the garden felt like they were slipping through Eleanor's fingers, each one more filled with tension than the last. No matter how hard she tried to avoid him, the pull of Christian Montague was impossible to escape. He lingered in her thoughts, in the spaces between the conversations she had with her family, in the pauses during polite exchanges at social events. Felt as though every moment she spent with him left a mark on her, something that couldn't be erased. Christian, too, seemed to be consumed by the growing connection between them. They exchanged brief glances whenever they were in the same room, the kind of glances that spoke volumes, filled with a shared understanding that no one else could comprehend. Yet the more their connection deepened, the greater the risk became. Eleanor knew that they were playing with fire, dangerous, destructive fire, and sooner or later, they would both be burned. It was at one of Lady Bridgerton's infamous dinner parties, a lavish gathering filled with the cream of London's high society, that their secret began to unravel. Eleanor was seated next to her cousin, pretending to listen to the latest gossip about Lady Danbury's upcoming wedding, but her mind was elsewhere. Christian was there, as always, moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who never quite belonged but was nonetheless tolerated. He caught her eye across the room, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to fade. But then, something changed. Lady Whistledown's latest gossip had spread like wildfire, and whispers filled the room about a certain nobleman's affairs, his family's scandals, his rumored connections to women of questionable repute. Alina's heart skipped a beat. As she heard the whispers, she knew exactly where this was headed. The rumors had begun. Christian was not just an enigmatic nobleman with little interest in society's affairs. He had a reputation that, if it were to be connected with hers, would destroy her. The truth about Christian, or rather the version of him society had created, was dangerous. He was seen as a man with a tarnished reputation, one that no respectable lady should associate with. His family had been involved in countless rumors, affairs, debts, and broken engagements. His name alone was enough to spark scandal, and for Eleanor, even the slightest hint of a connection could ruin everything she had worked so hard for. As the whispers grew louder, Eleanor felt her heart pound in her chest. The warmth she had once felt for Christian now felt like a heavy burden. She could already hear her mother's voice echoing in her mind, warning her of the consequences of such a union. A good match, Eleanor, she had always said, is one that secures your future, not one that puts you at risk. But Eleanor wasn't sure if she could continue pretending. Her feelings for Christian had only grown stronger, more undeniable. And every time they exchanged glances or words, it was as though the world around her faded away. She knew that if she gave in to this forbidden love, she would be sacrificing more than just her reputation. She would be sacrificing her future, her family's expectations, and the life she had always known. Christian, too, felt the weight of the situation. He had always prided himself on keeping a distance from the games of high society. But the deeper he fell for Eleanor, the harder it became to stay detached. He had never cared about the gossip, the rumors, or the whispers that followed him until now. Now there was something more at stake than just his own reputation. It was Eleanor's future, her family's approval, and the life she had been groomed for. That evening, Christian sought her out in the quiet garden of Lady Bridgerton's estate, where the scent of roses filled the air and the soft glow of lanterns illuminated the paths. The sound of laughter and music from the party echoed in the distance, but here, in this secluded corner, it was just the two of them. "Eleanor," Christian said, his voice urgent as he approached her. "We can't keep doing this. We can't. Keep pretending that this," he gestured between them, "isn't dangerous." Eleanor turned to face him, her heart in her throat. "What do you mean?" This Christian repeated, his eyes dark with in the heart of high society, where every glance and every gesture is weighed, a forbidden love begins to take root, one so daring that it could change the course of their lives forever. This isn't a story of a simple romance, but of two souls, caught between love and duty, bound by the secrets they must keep. What happens when the desire for each other outweighs everything else, even the rules that have governed their lives? Get ready, because this forbidden lover story will take you on a journey. It was a summer evening at the Bridgerton estate, the air filled with the sweet scent of blooming roses and the sound of guests laughing and talking. The grand ballroom sparkled under the soft glow of candlelight, and the guests mingled in their finest clothes. Lady Bridgerton's annual soirée was the highlight of the season, bringing together the crème de la crème of London society. As the orchestra played, couples twirled around the floor. Everyone followed the same unspoken rules. Show off your best, pretend to be perfect, and above all, never reveal what you truly feel. But in the midst of all this elegance, two people were about to meet for the first time, unaware that this moment would set everything in motion. Lady Eleanor Featherington, distant cousin to the Bridgertons, had always been seen as quiet and reserved, a perfect contrast to her more lively relatives. Though she was young, she had grown accustomed to keeping her emotions in check, knowing well that her position in society depended on it. She was here tonight not because she wished to attend, but because it was expected. Her family had a reputation to uphold, and she was their prized possession, meant to marry well and bring honor to the Featherington name. As she stood near a grand window, gazing out at the moonlit garden, she caught a glimpse of someone in the crowd. He wasn't someone she knew, but his presence seemed to draw her attention in a way nothing else had. His name was Christian Montague, a younger son of a well-known noble family. His face was striking. His dark eyes, sharp features, and calm demeanor stood out among the more flamboyant guests. Christian was a man of few words, his reputation built on being observant and calculating. He had a tendency to fade into the background, never fully engaging in the social games of London. People didn't quite know what to make of him, but his quiet intensity was enough to make anyone take a second look. Lady Eleanor noticed him watching the dancers, his gaze distant and unreadable. It wasn't until the moment she moved closer to the balcony for some fresh air that their paths crossed. As she stepped outside, she found him standing by the railing, staring out into the night. The air between them felt thick, charged with an invisible force. "Lovely evening," she said softly, trying to fill the silence with some polite words, though she wasn't sure why she had said them. She never initiated conversations with strangers. Christian turned to her, and for a moment, he just stared. There was something in the way his eyes studied her that made Eleanor feel both exposed and oddly protected, as if he saw right through her, yet didn't judge. "It is," he replied quietly, his voice low and smooth. "But sometimes the most beautiful moments happen when no one's around to witness them." Eleanor was taken aback by his words. She couldn't quite tell if he was speaking to her or to the stars above, but something in his tone stirred something inside her. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he spoke them, as if he had a deeper understanding of life than the others in the room. They stood there for a moment, the world inside the ballroom drifting further away. She felt something shift between them, a kind of recognition, though. They hadn't known each other for more than a few seconds. They felt as if they had known each other forever. It was a strange, almost unsettling feeling. But she couldn't look away. And as quickly as the connection formed, it was broken by the sudden arrival of her cousin, who pulled her back into the party. Yet, as they re-entered the bustling ballroom, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that this night and this man were going to change everything for her. She wasn't sure how or why, but deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of something she hadn't prepared for. You never saw coming. The evening passed in a blur of dances and conversations, each more perfunctory than the last. Lady Eleanor Featherington couldn't concentrate on the usual polite exchanges and well-rehearsed compliments. Her mind kept drifting back to that brief, fleeting moment on the balcony with Christian Montague. His words lingered in her thoughts, repeating themselves over and over in her head, like a secret melody that only she could hear. She had never felt this way before, not about anyone, certainly not a man like him. Christian was everything she was not supposed to be drawn to. He wasn't flashy or well-connected, like the other eligible bachelors. He didn't have a title that would elevate her status or offer her a chance at securing a bright future in high society. He was different, aloof, an enigma wrapped in mystery. Yet there was something about him that unsettled her. Something that made her heart beat faster and her thoughts scatter every time he entered the room. The next few days after, the Bridgerton ball were a whirlwind. Lady Eleanor attended several high society events, always in the company of her family and other aristocrats, yet she could not shake the thought of Christian. Every time their paths crossed at an afternoon gathering at a family dinner, there was an unspoken tension between them. It was as if the world around them disappeared, and only they existed in that brief moment of connection. It was at one of Lady Bridgerton's famous garden parties that their next encounter took place. Eleanor had been sitting alone on a marble bench watching the guests interact. The garden was full of laughter, flowers, and the soft rustle of silk skirts, but Eleanor felt detached from it all. Her mind was elsewhere, on a man who seemed to see her in a way no one else did. Christian appeared, as if summoned by her thoughts, and took a seat beside her without a word. He didn't need to speak to make his presence felt. His quiet confidence was enough. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The sound of birds chirping and distant conversations filled the space between them. But it was the silence that felt most real. "I thought I'd find you here," Christian finally spoke, his voice low, his tone betraying a certain warmth. Even though his words were simple, Eleanor turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected him to find her alone. She had hoped for it, but never expected it to happen. "I suppose I'm easy to find when I'm not surrounded by a crowd," she replied with a small, uncertain smile. There was a shift in the air as their eyes met something unspoken, but so heavy it seemed to pull them closer. Christian's gaze softened, and for the first time, Eleanor noticed the vulnerability behind his distant exterior. He wasn't just the mysterious nobleman everyone whispered about. He was a man who carried his own burdens, his own doubts. "Glad you're not like everyone else," he said, his words simple yet loaded with meaning. "Most people are so caught up in the game they forget what it means to truly see someone." His words made Eleanor's chest tighten. Is that what she had been doing all these years, playing the game? Trying to fit in, to please everyone, to secure a future by marrying the right man? She hadn't realized until now how suffocating it all felt. "I never asked to be part of the game," Eleanor replied, her voice softer than she intended. "But some things are beyond our control." Christian looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers as if looking for something. A flicker of something passed between them, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "You don't have to play by their rules," he said, his voice just above a whisper. "You don't have to follow their expectations, Eleanor. You're free to make your own choices." His words hit her like a wave crashing against the shore. Was it really possible to break free from the chains that bound her to this life? To live for herself? To choose her own path, even if it meant defying everything she had been taught? Before she could respond, The moment was broken by the arrival of her cousin, who, with a look of surprise, interrupted their conversation. Eleanor quickly stood up, her heart racing. She forced a smile, masking the turmoil inside her. "Excuse me," she said, her voice betraying none of the chaos she felt. "I must attend to family matters." As she walked away, she stole one last glance at Christian, who remained seated, his gaze still fixed on her. She didn't know what had just happened between them, but she knew one thing for sure: it was more than just a passing connection. This was something dangerous, something that could unravel her carefully constructed world. Eleanor had always known the rules of society, what was expected, what was proper. But now, in Christian's presence, those rules seemed meaningless. Her heart pulled her in one direction while her mind tried to cling to the life she had always known. The pull of this forbidden connection was stronger than anything she had ever felt. And though she didn't want to admit it, she knew deep down she was already lost to him. The days following their last meeting felt like a blur to Eleanor. Couldn't seem to escape the pull of Christian Montague, no matter how hard she tried. Every social gathering, every family dinner, every moment she spent within the confines of her usual life felt like an illusion. The events, the conversations, the smiles, all of it was overshadowed by the memory of that quiet moment they had shared in the garden. But there was no denying it. The absence of his presence gnawed at her, leaving a hollow space where his smile, his touch, his quiet understanding used to be. She tried to convince herself that it was for the best, that he was better off without her, but deep down, she knew the truth. Her heart still ached for him, still burned with the desire to be with him. Despite the consequences, it was during one of those long, restless nights that the letter arrived. It was not a letter she had expected, nor one she had ever thought would come. But when the servant handed it to her, her heart leapt in her chest. The handwriting was unmistakable Christian's. Eleanor tore open the envelope with trembling hands. Her breath caught in her throat as she unfolded the carefully written words. "My dearest Eleanor, the weight of my silence has been unbearable, but I could not bring myself to reach out sooner. Every moment apart from you has felt like a punishment I've placed upon myself, but I could not risk pulling you deeper into this mess. The world's judgment, the consequences of our actions, they have become a reality we cannot ignore. Know that what we did was reckless. I know that our love has caused pain for both our families, and for that, I will always regret it. But I cannot regret loving you. I cannot regret what we shared. No matter how much the world may try to tear it apart, there is nothing that can change the path we are on. And perhaps it is best that we stay apart for now. You must focus on your family, your future, and your place in the world, as must I. I know that I cannot offer you the life you deserve, not in the way society expects. I would not wish to ruin you further by being with me. But no, this sigh will always carry you in my heart, if fate allows. Perhaps one day the world will have softened enough to give us a chance to be free from its shackles. Until then, know that you are not forgotten, and you are not alone. Yours." Kristen Eleanor's hand shook as she read the final words. The letter was a balm to her soul and a wound to her heart. Kristen was walking away, not because he no longer cared, but because he was protecting her from the consequences of their love. He was doing the one thing she had always feared he would do. He was choosing duty, choosing to let her go for her own sake. But as the weight of his decision sank in, Eleanor felt her world shift beneath her feet. This wasn't the end of their love. She refused to believe it. Couldn't be. She had never felt so alive as she had when she was with him. And now, to be without him, no matter what the world said, felt like a slow death. Her heart ached. For the future she had dreamed of, the future where she and Christian were free to be who they were without fear. But that was not the world they lived in. She was a Featherington. She was bound by her family's expectations, by the rigid walls of society's judgment, but that didn't mean she had to give up on love. Eleanor knew she could not remain trapped in the cage that had been built for her. She could not spend her days in regret, wondering what might have been. There had to be another way, a way for her to live her life on her own terms, for her own happiness. The world might not have the space for her love with Christian, but that didn't mean she had to let go of it completely. In the silence of her room, Eleanor made a vow to herself. She would fight for her future, for her love, and for her freedom. She would not let society's expectations define her. And one day, when the storm had passed, she would find a way back to Christian, because she knew deep down that their love was worth any cost. The days following Christian's letter were filled with a strange, unrelenting emptiness. Eleanor tried to return to her daily life, tending the endless stream of parties, dinners, and social gatherings that were part of the life she was meant to lead. But it felt hollow. She smiled when she needed to, nodded when required, beneath the facade of politeness. There was a growing void. Christian's absence in her life was like a shadow that followed her wherever she went. His absence a constant reminder of everything she had lost. The scandal had not been forgotten by the world, if anything. It had only intensified. The Featheringtons' name had been tarnished, whispers following Eleanor wherever she went. Her family's reputation was fragile. Every move she made seemed to weigh heavier because of it. But Eleanor refused to let that be the end of her story. One evening, as she sat by the fire in the quiet of her room, an idea began to form up. A vision of the future that no longer seemed so impossible. She had spent too long being defined by the rules of society, by the expectations of others. But what about her own desires, her own happiness? What about the life she could create? On her own terms? That night, she made a decision. She would no longer wait. Eleanor's heart told her that Christian was the one she was meant to be with, and she wasn't going to let anything stand in the way of that love. It was true that their love had caused scandal and disruption, but it had also been the only thing that had ever felt real, that had ever made her feel truly alive. No matter what the world thought, no matter how many people tried to pull her away from him, Eleanor knew that if they were ever to be truly happy, they had to take control of their own fate. With the dawn of a new day, Eleanor set her plan into motion. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and the consequences would be far-reaching, but it was a risk she was willing to take. She had to follow her heart. The first step was to leave the Featherington estate behind, at least for a while. Her family could not stop her from living her life, and it was clear that the more she stayed in that world, the more suffocating it became. She packed a small bag, gathering only what she needed, and took a letter she had written to her mother. It was not an explanation, not an apology. It was a declaration of her own desires, her own future. She had no intention of asking for permission. The letter simply said, "Mother, I am doing what my heart tells me I must. I will no longer live according to the expectations of others. I do not wish to disgrace you, but I cannot continue to pretend. I'm leaving to find my own path." Eleanor with the letter left on her desk. Eleanor slipped away under the cover of night, making her way to the carriage that would take her to the one place she knew she could find Solace Christian's estate. The journey was long, but her determination pushed her forward. She spent the hours in quiet reflection, wondering what kind of reception she would face upon arriving. Would Christian still feel the same? Would he even want to see her after everything that had happened? But she couldn't afford to dwell on doubts. She had already made up her mind. When the carriage finally arrived at Christian's estate, the first light of dawn had begun to touch the horizon. The house was quiet, the windows dark, as though the world had not yet awakened. Eleanor's heart beat faster in her chest as she made her way up the stone steps. She took a deep breath before knocking softly on the door. Moments passed before the door creaked open, and standing there, in the dim light of the early morning, was Christian. His face was weary, worn from the events that had unfolded, but when his eyes locked with hers, everything else seemed to fade away. He had been waiting too. "I knew you would come," he whispered, his voice hoarse as though he hadn't spoken in days. Eleanor didn't wait for him to say anything more. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them in a single, determined stride, and placed her hands on either side of his face. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry for not coming sooner. I couldn't wait." "Any more, Christian? I can't live without you." For a moment, Christian simply stood there, his eyes searching hers, as though he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. But then, with a deep sigh, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if afraid she might slip away. I thought you had given up on us. He admitted softly, his voice thick with emotion. I thought you'd chosen to live the life they expected of you. I almost did, she confessed, her voice muffled against his chest. But I realized I can't live like that, not anymore. I can't live for anyone else but myself, and the only life I want is the one with you. Christian's arms tightened around her, his heart beating as one with hers. Then we will make our own future, Eleanor, together.
The world outside
Was still filled with whispers and judgment, but in this moment, Eleanor knew that nothing else mattered. They had made their choice. They had chosen each other, and as they stood there, holding one another in the quiet dawn, Eleanor realized that their love, though forbidden and tested by the harshest of circumstances, had survived. It had been a love that had defied the rules, that had fought against the world. In the end, it had triumphed. Their future was uncertain, their path unclear, but one thing was certain: they would walk it together. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The weight of their unspoken love began to press down on Eleanor with an unbearable force. Every moment she spent near Christian felt like a delicate balance on the edge of a knife, too much weight, and it would tip, sending everything into chaos. And yet, no matter how hard she tried to distance herself, no matter how many times she pushed him away with an excuse or a reason, the connection between them only deepened. It was as if fate itself had bound them together, and now they were both trapped in a web they could neither escape nor untangle. It didn't take long for their secret to slip beyond their control. At first, it was subtle whispers here and there at social gatherings, the kind of gossip that no one would ever admit to starting, but that always seemed to grow louder with each passing day. Eleanor heard her name in hushed conversations, always. Paired with Christian's, they spoke of her late-night walks, her lingering glances, the moments when they shared quiet, intimate exchanges that no one else could understand. And then it happened. One evening, at a lavish masquerade ball held in the grand hall of the Featherington estate, the rumors reached their breaking point. The night was full of shimmering masks and extravagant gowns, with every noble family in attendance. Eleanor had attended, in her usual quiet manner, trying to disappear into the shadows of the crowd. To keep her distance from Christian and the mounting pressure that threatened to tear them apart, but as soon as she entered the ballroom, it felt different. There was an electric hum in the air, a sense of something shifting, something about to happen. And then, amidst the swirling dancers and the laughter that echoed through the high-ceilinged room, Eleanor saw him, Christian, dressed in a dark suit that made him stand out among the crowd of brightly colored attire, moved with the same quiet grace he always had. He was watching her from across the room, his gaze piercing through the mass of people. She tried to look away, to avoid meeting his eyes, but something inside her couldn't. She felt herself drawn to him, as if an invisible force was pulling her closer, despite the consequences. She felt a flutter of hope, a foolish, fleeting thought that maybe they could be together. Maybe this wouldn't have to end. But fate had other plans. A sudden voice, raised above the murmur of the crowd, broke through the delicate moment they shared. Eleanor froze. She turned toward the voice, her blood running cold when she saw the Source Lady Danbury, standing at the top of the grand staircase with an expression of disapproval painted across her face. She was pointing directly at Eleanor and Christian, her eyes sharp and filled with the kind of judgment that no one could ignore. Isn't it strange? Lady Danbury's voice rang out, cutting through the conversation like a blade. How some noble families, despite all their grace and wealth, seem to forget where they belong. The entire room fell silent, and Eleanor's stomach turned as the guests turned their attention toward her and Christian. The whispers began almost immediately, rising in a wave of sharp, eager voices. "Did you see that?" Moen muttered. "There's something between them." "Eleanor Featherington with Christian Montague," another voice added, filled with disbelief. "That's a scandal waiting to happen." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the world around her begin to spin. The scandal, the rumors, everything had erupted at once, and she couldn't stop it. She could see Christian's eyes narrowing, the cold realization that their secret was no longer theirs to protect. In that moment, the mask they had both carefully constructed shattered. Leaving them exposed and vulnerable to the judgment of everyone in the room, Christian took a step forward, his expression hardening, but Eleanor could see the storm brewing. In his eyes, he had never been one to care about what others thought of him. But now, with Eleanor in the midst of it, the situation felt different. The stakes were higher, the consequences too severe to ignore. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't want this to happen." He looked at her, his expression softening for a moment before hardening again. "We don't have control over how the world sees us," he said quietly, his words carrying a weight of truth. "But we do have control over what we do next." Before she could respond, a sharp voice interrupted them once again, this time coming from her mother. "Eleanor," Mother cried, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "What is the meaning of this? This is a disgrace. How could you allow this scandal to come to light? Do you have any idea what this will do to our family's reputation?" Eleanor's mother stormed toward her, her hands trembling as she grasped her daughter's arm. "We will discuss this later in private," she hissed, her voice tight with fury. Eleanor's heart sank as she was pulled away from Christian, the distance between them growing with each step. She could feel the eyes of every guest on her, the weight of their judgment bearing down on her like a physical force. The whispers followed her, the scandal now no longer a rumor, but a reality. It wasn't just the rumors of a forbidden love anymore, it was a public humiliation, exposure that could not be undone. As her mother led her away from the ballroom, Eleanor caught one last glimpse of Christian, stood there, his face unreadable. But she could see the struggle in his eyes, the pain of what they had lost in that single moment. His reputation, her family's honor, their futures, all of it now hung in the balance. Shattered by the very love they had tried so desperately to hide inside her mother's private chambers, the storm finally broke. Her mother's anger poured out in a flurry of harsh words, accusing Eleanor of foolishness, of ruining everything for them. But Eleanor couldn't focus on her mother's outburst. All she could think about was Christian, standing alone in the midst of a storm that neither of them had asked for, and deep down, Eleanor knew one thing: there was no going back now. The world had seen them, and the consequences would be far-reaching, leaving scars on both their hearts and their futures. The days after the scandal broke were nothing short of suffocating. Eleanor felt as though she were living in a world that had turned against her, every familiar face now a mask of judgment. Every corner of her home a reminder of the shame that had been brought upon her family. The Featherington estate, once a symbol of wealth and respectability, now seemed like a gilded cage, trapping her in a future she no longer recognized. The whispers were constant, following her through every room, every gathering. Every moment, her mother's wrath had been unforgiving. The scolding had been endless, her words laced with both fury and disappointment. "What have you done, Eleanor? Do you have any idea how much you've tarnished our family's name?" Her mother's face had been twisted in anguish, her usual grace lost in the weight of public humiliation. Every word felt like a dagger, each one sinking deeper into Eleanor's chest. She knew what the consequences were, but hearing them aloud, from the woman who had once taught her the importance of reputation, was almost too much to bear. For the first time in her life, Eleanor had felt completely alone. She spent most of her days locked away in her room, avoiding the public eye, her emotions swinging between anger and deep sadness. She longed for the quiet moments with Christian, the stolen glances, the secret conversations that had made her feel alive in ways she'd never thought possible. But now, all of that seemed like a distant memory, something unreachable and lost. In the wake of the scandal, Christian, too, was nowhere to be found. Eleanor had hoped that in the chaos of it all, he would reach out to her, that they would somehow find a way to weather the storm together. The days passed and no word came. He'd been cast aside by the very world that had always looked at him with suspicion, and now their love, once so pure and passionate, was marred by the weight of society's judgment.